And don't start your email off with Dummy David.
Do it. Let's go. How many people can send a Dummy David email to contact@helpmewithhipaa.com? The 5th person that sends the Dummy David email gets a special prize from me.
Great. Just great.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where we help you with HIPAA. How does that sound? My name is David Sims, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Donna Grindle. How are you today, Donna?
I am great, David. I am ready to visit with you and chat about HIPAA.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I went to the Ashley Madison list, and my name was not there, so I'm pretty pumped about that.
You didn't even remember whether you were there, huh?
I was like, I wonder if I've ever done that in the past. I don't think I have, but let me check.
Yeah, it's one of those late night things. You never know.
Yeah. No, you don't. You know, some things you do while on a dare or whatever. But yeah, I didn't want this to be a topic of a conversation with me and the spouse. And they're like, I don't know anything about that.
But you checked for her name too, right?
You know I did.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that in another episode.
Yeah, actually we will. So, but today we're going to talk about it's the people. So every time there's a problem, somewhere along the way has to do with people, whether it's inside the organization or outside the organization. People are always involved. So the problem always is going to arise as long as you're dealing with people that they are part of the compliance aspects that we have to really pay attention to. And you have some really great examples of how people have kind of allowed things to fall through the cracks, so to speak, and become problems for some organizations.
Yes, I do have examples.
So the first one we're going to look at of your examples is the University of Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. Before you do that, if you want to kind of preface that with something else, go right ahead.
Well, I would preface the whole thing is that names have been withheld to protect the innocent.
Or the guilty.
Or the guilty. Yeah, we don't know names. These are the stories as they were told.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So, not to say that these are the only ones. In fact, there's a wealth of information that makes this point. I just picked some that seemed interesting or relevant to the conversation. And we're going to start with the University of Pittsburgh because they actually had 2 hacks, 2 breaches. Last year, they were hacked. And 62,000 employees' data were taken. And so far, over 800 of those have reported some level of identity theft. So we know what they were after there. But they only got employee data. They didn't get healthcare data. Then this year, because they're so lucky, they had a breach. But it wasn't their breach, the covered entities breach. It was the business associate that set them up. And we've talked before about you can't just assume with your business associates. If they sign the contract, that does not mean that they're doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. And we don't know all the details about the business associate, but we know that it involved an employee at the billing service call center who was copying off patient information from the billing system and managed to sell the number that they reported was 2,259 patients' medical records to a third party. So they were making some money. And the bad news, as always, is that University of Pittsburgh learned about this not from their business associate having policies and procedures that caught the problem. Clearly, with that many patients, it could have been one pass and they caught it. But no, they got the FBI calling them up. So, that was a wonderful moment for the compliance officer and the security officer. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, FBI's on the phone.
This is one time where the FBI actually did call you.
Yeah.
Not the FBI's on the phone wanting access to my computer.
That's right. Yeah, it's not the scam. And you probably do think that. You get...
I'd have hung up on them. Yeah, right. FBI my butt.
Yeah. Remember that, David. when you get that call. It's the FBI calling.
Yeah, whatever.
Peace out. But again, it involved a person. So here's an employee that's able to bypass whatever mechanisms are in place. We're going to assume there's some, but there could be none. And they were assuming that their staff was not going to do it. Because a lot of times, you go in these smaller environments and they're like, we know everybody. They're not going to do this. And I always point out, you don't know what's going on in their life. You don't know what kind of pressures are happening. You don't know what happens when they leave this building. You don't know about the phone calls they're getting or the messages they're getting throughout the day. All kinds of things can cause employees to change paths in life. We've seen it 100 times. So you never know what could change in an employee that's been there for years and years. So to assume that, because I know everybody and I know their mama and their daddy and their cousin Bubba.
We're in Georgia now.
You can't assume that because we know what assume does.
Yeah, we do.
So speaking of that, we can go to the second example about the people is in Michigan, an employee of Oakwood Healthcare, and in the news story, they actually put her name there, was recently fired for putting HIPAA violation Facebook comments. So
no, you can't violate HIPAA on Facebook.
I know. You're not supposed to put patient information on Facebook. It's clear. Everything says you're not supposed to do that. However, the situation, I guess the employee was just so outraged that she felt that she was obligated to let it out. I don't know. But she worked at the hospital where a suspect in a police shooting was brought for care. And she made 2 posts. One they wouldn't repeat, so I don't know what that one said. Because the one that they did repeat said something to the effect of, I looked a cop killer in the eyes and I hope he rots in hell. So,
Yes. Okay. That's pretty good.
Yeah. So that clearly stated that if you looked in the news, then you saw what happened and you knew where they took the suspect and you knew they were treated there. So it's clearly...
Or mistreated.
Or mistreated. Yeah, you don't know what happened. So the whole innocent till proven guilty, she went right to judge and jury and sentenced him to rot in hell and then told everybody about it. You can have your own opinions, but you cannot take patient information and discuss your opinions. And a lot of people think, well, I didn't say their name, so I'm okay. Well, clearly, even though she didn't say the name in this one, she's not okay. The question is, can I figure it out who you're talking about? Can I get it within a reasonable number of people? If I can narrow it down to less than 100 people who you're talking about, that's not good. That's not good because I can, pretty quickly narrow things down, especially today with social media and all that kind of stuff, the access to information.
It's probably all over the news who the actual suspect was.
Right.
And just because people know about it doesn't mean you can still tell people about it.
Right. You can't. You can't even go home and talk to your spouse about it. If it can identify a single individual, there's nothing to say. You got to keep your mouth shut. It's not for you to chit-chat about. It doesn't matter who it is. And I know there's certainly cases where healthcare providers struggle with those decisions because they disagree with who the individual is, how they live. There are a million reasons that you can have bigotry or disgust or whatever you want to call it, but it doesn't allow you to decide not to care for them. And I know it's a constant struggle for healthcare providers, but that doesn't make it okay for you to then violate your obligations, both to the patient's care as well as we often mention, protecting their privacy is patient care.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes a perfect segue into our next one. And the next one, this is a Carilion, I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's a clinic in Roanoke, Virginia. And this clinic in Roanoke, Virginia either they finally started looking or they implemented a product similar to AMS Sphere, where we talked to Ray a few weeks ago, and their product actually does the job of evaluating the access that employees have. And what patients are they seeing? What things are they doing? Those kind of things. Well, this particular clinic, they had a policy that, like, in a big news story like the previous discussion, they would go, if there had been a big news story, and they would make sure they would monitor who was accessing that patient's account to make sure it wasn't being abused. We'll say that access was only minimum necessary. If you didn't need to be in there, you weren't in there. Well, that's all fine and good, and the manual part of it. But then once you really start looking, apparently, well, the headlines were stuff like it was mass violations and widespread. Okay, well, there were 14 employees. Now, it didn't say the size of the clinic, and maybe there were only 15 employees in the clinic, so that is widespread. I don't know about the news stories and the clarity on it, but the number of employees that they found looking at records that they had no business looking at, 14 employees. So that tells you right there.
They didn't have enough work to do.
Yeah.
That's what it tells me.
Well, and the sad thing is they go in there and they're looking at this stuff, and you can see in a patient's record, if you have access to everything, you can see like family history, you can see all kinds of information about an individual that you can't see. On a credit card, you can see where they've been and where they like to shop, maybe, or where they like to eat. But you don't know what medications they've been on. You don't know what physicians they've seen. You don't know lab tests, all these kind of things. And that's what you can do when you look at a patient's record. And it's like I got a call from an acquaintance, a friend calls and says, look, I got this question. Friend of mine is in the middle of one of those family disputes over inheritance, and somebody has been looking at his brother's records and using the information in his records. And I was like, well, give me more input. And because it sounded juicy. And so it turned out it's a similar situation, that there was a motivation to do it because the opposing party in the lawsuit worked at a dentist office, and the employee at the dentist office was inquiring to the primary care for medical records and sending, they were going in and looking, and primary care happened to say, are you having a lot of dental problems that you haven't told me about? Is something going on? I mean, is it something I should be looking at? And that's the only way they found out. So they were asking me what to do, and I gave them the number of the regional OCR office because, there's a chance you don't know what's going to happen. She might be the security officer at the dentist office. You don't want to report it there.
Yeah. So, but
again, it's the people. And so these 14 employees, while it doesn't say what they were doing, they had no business in there. And whether it's, I'm looking up my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend to see what she's doing, or any of those kind of things, or even something innocent as I'm looking at my own records. Many places don't let you look at your own records. So, it's kind of like, what might you find that the doctor thinks of you? You don't like me.
So if you're an employee and you have rights to your own records, you have to request that through the proper channels like everybody else would, I would assume. Yeah,
well, there's varying policies on being able to look at your own information. And you can, I've heard many debates from both sides of it, but it depends on the individual. And, it'd be interesting to say, okay, physician, you're not allowed to read your own chart, even though you're treating yourself. So, but, physicians treating themselves is not a good idea often. But many organizations say you are not allowed to look at your own records because you don't know what we're putting in there about our evaluations of you. And we could be detecting mental health issues. We could be concerned about something that we're watching, but because of some other thing, we're not going to explain that to you until we get more tests back because we don't have enough information. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough line when you go with, the whole new drive is patients should be involved in their own care and more proactive instead of just doing what the doctors do. So it's a tough call, but every organization has to make that decision and make a point of saying, you're not allowed to look at your own records even if you have access to it. And that includes, cases where the physician's office may have access to records at the hospital. Because for many reasons, a surgeon, an OBGYN, any of the specialists, you could see why they would have the ability to look up records at the hospital. Well, I can see all kinds of things when I look at my records in the hospital.
What about, I ran into this numerous times with clients where, let's say they call me up and they say, we're having a printing problem. We can't print from our EHR program. And it happens to be, maybe they can't print a chart or they can't print a list of the scheduling clients for coming in that day or whatever, or patients rather. And oftentimes I say, okay, I think I have the problem fixed, but I need you to go in and try to print. And so what they'll do typically is they'll pull up their own chart, or sometimes even a random chart like the last patient that came in, so they can try to print that. So they're not necessarily looking at the information, but they are accessing that chart. So do they need to document that somewhere?
Technically, they shouldn't be doing that. That shouldn't be. Pull up the last patient you looked at that you had a reason. Pull up the next patient you're going to work with because you have a reason. That's what you should be doing. Or create a test account, which is what I often have people do, is to create essentially a dummy patient in their records where you can put things in and then write them off if you're doing financial stuff. But you can keep that patient there and everybody can have access to that patient. But it lets you test things out like that to test the printer. And whether you call it, go to David Sims' account, David Dummy, and print David Dummy.
Why can't it be Donna Dummy? Why can't it be Donna Dummy?
Well, it's your client. They don't know me.
I'll tell them to make it Donna Dummy. Our policy is that we always use Donna Dummy.
Dummy David. But that's what I often recommend is that you set up an account that's nobody, that you can try things and put things in that don't matter and try to test to see what the things do in the system, because then you alleviate all that other stuff. Okay. And from time to time, though, there's scenarios where you can't do that, but you need to be aware of the decisions you make about what patients people are looking at and should they be in order to test things from a technology standpoint. Often you need to be working with the, higher level admin level people, which have a lot more authority than others. But definitely David Dummy is the way to go.
Okay.
Because it's the people,
It's the dummies, dummy.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So what about the physician that had the data breach? The second data breach.
Yeah, the 2015. They did the two breaches in the same year for the same reason. And again, it's about the people. People are the attackers and the thieves and the criminals, just like people are the innocent, I screwed up, and I don't choose to make decisions the way that I should kind of people. In this case, it was a little both. In January, the physician, clearly they're not in a good part of town, we'll say. We'll call it that, right? You're not in a good part of town when you're broken into in January and they steal a desktop computer, a couple of laptops, server, some charts. There was all kinds of things that they had stolen. Well, that was in the second break-in. In the first break-in, they only got one. So now you see where I'm going here. The first break-in, they grabbed some charts and a credit card register, got 350 patients involved in what they grabbed. And they said, well, that went well. And, so they're a thief and it seemed easy enough, and they watched around. So from January, they got 350 patients. In March, they came back and said, well, I need some help carrying this stuff out. It was so easy to get in. I guess they got way more stuff. 17 patient charts, 2 laptop computers, a desktop computer, and a server when they went back the second time because they brought help.
And we're not talking about a breach or a hack. We're talking about somebody physically smashing the door in and going in.
Yeah, clearly it was easy enough because they did it once and then they came back a second time. Now,
it's a non-intelligent breach.
Yeah. Didn't require anything other than, hey, come carry this for me. And that's how they got it the second time. But it says to me, this is a people thing. You've got criminals, and clearly they know how to get into your office. So make changes. And the key change that they should have made that would have made things better was to encrypt all of their devices, right? Because if I got people breaking in, they're going to take things out that they shouldn't. And the best way to protect myself is to encrypt. And I can assure you that had they encrypted everything after the first break-in, if it wasn't already encrypted, the second break-in would not have involved the 1,342 patients that were taken on all of that equipment because it would be under safe harbor. And unfortunately, the 350 patients in the first one, all of the letters that went to them from the first one were also stored on the computers that they got. So if they weren't in the records from the first, so they're twice.
Double breach.
Yeah.
Breach.
So 1,342 patients, 350 of them second time, telling them how things have happened. But unfortunately, had they just encrypted stuff, I mean, you and I know that, okay, you could put bars on the doors. You could get a better security system. You could hire, which they now have hired, a full-time security guard who stopped a third break-in. That's how easy it was to them. So they're just coming back. So the good news is they stopped the third one from happening, but I don't know how much could have been left in there at that point. And hiring a security guard to be there is way more expensive than just encrypting those devices. So how they had, and the fact that the vendor didn't have some involvement in making sure all of that was encrypted. So there's not a lot of details on exactly what was included. Did they get it off the server or any of those kind of things? But, they got the charts, the paper charts. So how many times do we talk about paper matters too? And social security numbers and all of those things. So they got a boondoggle of information, let's just say.
A boondoggle.
Yeah. And
I'll Google that to see exactly how many that is.
Yeah, check that out. But, they were password protected computers. It doesn't mention them being encrypted or any of that kind of stuff. So, you just gotta wonder.
But it also goes to speak to the point that if you have a breach, and let's say you do catch it, because there's probably a lot of breaches that people don't catch because they're not looking. But if you catch it, there's a good chance that they're going to try again, whether it's somebody kicking the front door in or whether they're doing it through technology. If somebody's able to get in, they're going to do it again, or at least try.
Yeah, they're going to look and see if you've done anything to thwart them. And you should look that word up too, David. Thwart. Thwart.
I got it.
So
you're just full of big words today.
I know. I'm at least trying to use them appropriately. So
I shall not thwart you on that.
So when we look at this particular one, you've got the people that were breaking in. So you got that. That's one thing. And then you've got the doctor and the staff not doing the things and taking action to protect themselves, either with physical safeguards, technical safeguards, or administrative safeguards that would have stopped or at least mitigated the damage in the second one. And then, thankfully, they had mitigated the third one, and now they've announced they're moving to a new part of town. So
that's the ultimate physical protection. Yeah. Let's just move.
Let's save some money. They're not going to break in again. That's not a good way to look at it. And it's also the same way that many people look at the protections for the technical break-ins and the hacking, which is now a big deal. they always say, well, they're not going to break in. They're not going to break in. And then 6 months later, you find out they've been in there a year, and then they just keep, they go around whatever protections you put in place.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to what kind of protections can you really put in place for the final one that we have that explains is the people. And this one's
which is
this one's a doozy. It's a doozy.
Speaking of protection.
David, great segue, David. This is a doctor who is actually convicted of illegally accessing medical records. And you may say, a doctor can illegally access medical records? Should you say that, David? Why, you may.
You did say that.
You may say that, David. But what happened in this one? This one was a good one. The doctor is having an affair.
Say it isn't so.
The doctor is having an affair. Reference Ashley Madison. The doctor's having an affair, and when the mistress got a call from her physician that said, hey, we've got some questions about some things that came up in your blood work. Please give us a call. She mentions it to him, and he's like, oh, I'll just look it up with my hospital login. I'll just look it up and see what's going on. And she said, absolutely not. You do not have any authorization. I don't want you looking at my personal health records, period. Do not do it. Well, obviously that was not clear enough. Because, clearly he's not somebody that's got a lot of moral character when he's having this affair with you and he's trying to keep it a secret, doesn't want anybody to know. You know all of those things. So thinking that you can just say, I'm different. Again.
Speaking of protection.
Clearly there were physical protections not taking place because now he was concerned that the lack of physical safeguards could mean that he had been exposed to STDs. And so he's worried that she has a breach. That she has STDs. What did you say?
It was a breach.
He's worried he had a breach. And he was concerned she had an STD and he didn't know about it. And it was in her blood work and it was going to, not worried about her. He was worried it was going to expose the affair because he was going to get it and his wife would know she didn't have it. So purely motivated for self-protection, the physician goes and looks at the records anyway. And that all comes out, and the mistress has a fit, so he's exposed anyway. But, clearly there were a lot of protections that needed to be in place that weren't. And he pled guilty in federal court and paid some fines, and there was some stuff that happened, but he did get to keep his license, but only if he's being monitored for poor behavior. So somebody has to stay on top of him. But
that's what got him in trouble in the first place.
Yeah. So you can see that it's not just thinking, oh, I've got a temp employee or a volunteer that I have to worry about. No, I got to worry about every person from the top down. The CEO, the physicians, all the clinical, it doesn't matter. People will abuse their authority. There's just some people that can't control themselves. They're going to do it. So there you have it.
And it is worthwhile mentioning that we talked about this, again, the Sphere product that we talked about with Ray Ribble in a past episode, that is a product that can help organizations, small organizations, hospitals, that matter, help them try to find out when their employees are doing things they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And if you haven't listened to that episode, you can go back and listen to it because it's definitely a good episode. It talks about Sphere as a product and what it does. And it's very interesting as to what it does. And it's pretty exciting technology as to how it can really help.
Big Brother's watching.
Yeah. But
it's just part of the whole thing that everybody knows that medical is seriously behind. It's a huge industry, massive, that is a massive chunk of the United States economy. The United States industry as a whole is affected by healthcare in every way. Yet they're one of the least secured and technology advanced industries that we have. And it is changing. Granted, it's changing a lot. It's changing rapidly. with so much being invested in a lot of the new things with the medical devices, and they're doing things. You talk about the Fitbit kind of stuff and how it can monitor you, and it'll just be a matter of time before you get up and you have to plug yourself in to get all of this stuff, and then your insurance company says you may go out for the day.
Yeah, we noticed your heart rate is elevated. Your premiums will go up in the next 15 minutes.
So, needless to say, you got to worry about the people, because people will tell you that people, oh, good Lord, people tell you, oh, well, I can't afford the fancy firewalls. I can't afford the big security system with the cameras. I can't afford this. I can't afford that. I can tell you that encryption is not hugely expensive to implement. Right, David?
No, it's very inexpensive.
Yeah, I mean, there's expensive ways to do it, and there's some cases where it can be expensive. But for most small environments particularly, it is not expensive. But a lot of these other things can be, there's a cost to them. There's a cost to applications that can monitor things. There's a cost to network scans and those kind of things, because it is ongoing and it must be maintained and up to date, or it's not really going to be helpful. It'll just kind of fade away. But managing people and asking people questions and paying attention to what people are doing is, it's one of the most simple things, yet the most complicated. Mm-hmm. You got to train people. And if you're training, you've got to train in so many different ways, because people learn differently. It's not a one size fits all to get people to learn things. Some people need it to hear it. Others need to see it. Some people need to have something in their hand where they can read it and go back and look at it. Other people learn really well from a podcast. Yay! Those are our friends.
And it, definitely should be said, as we've said before in our training podcast episode, that, doing it once a year is just not going to get it. You're not going to have people change the way they do things if you're having a 1 day a year training on HIPAA. It's not going to happen.
Well, you go back to the University of Pittsburgh thing where the billing service employee was taking things. So let's just, we're going to make all of this up because we don't know anything about this person, but we're going to use this as an example. So let's say this individual got their training in January, and then they have people in their lives who are constantly telling them, look, it's easy. You should just steal this stuff. We can sell it. We can make all this money. So you trained them in January, but from February to August now, they've heard about how easy it is to do, how much money they can make. And you haven't mentioned anything about it since then. Who's getting more, who is the employee starting to listen to more?
The bad guys.
The bad guys. How easy is it? You make so much money. And, let's say I can't pay my bills. The house needs a new air conditioner and it's in the middle of the summer. You don't know what you don't know. So there you go.
All right.
So that's all I have to say about that, David.
So don't just look at the technology. Look at the people. You need to invest in your people just as much as you do your technology, if not more so. Kind of depends. I know some people who don't do either one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to have, under the security rule, technical, administrative, and physical safeguards. And people are involved in all of those. And then under the privacy rule, you have very specific things that you should and shouldn't do. People are the ones doing them. It's not computers at that point. So definitely need to make sure that you worry about the people.
Awesome. Well, if you like today's podcast, then head on over to iTunes and give us a 5-star review and tell us how awesome we are. And if you'd like to visit us on the website, it is www.helpmewithhipaa.com. And we also would invite you to go to Facebook and see our page there and share the podcast out with all your friends and your followers and the people that you see in Walmart who won't pay attention to you, but they'll friend you on Facebook. Tweet us out, all the other good stuff.
Yeah, we're tweeting, we're booking, and
we're face spacing and tweet decking and all kind of other stuff.
Yeah. We're out there. However you want to engage, feel free to leave us a question you'd like for us to cover, because we're doing those as well. When they come in an email, we either include them in an episode or we do a special one for a little 5-minute HIPAA answer. So please let us know how we're doing, as long as you like it.
Yeah, and don't start your email off with Dummy David.
Do it. Let's go. How many people can send a Dummy David email to contact@helpmewithhipaa.com? The 5th person that sends the Dummy David email gets a special prize from me.
Great. Just great. All right, so we're going to end it here. Don't forget, HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.